Amara was like any other young person in the city, filled with dreams, yet burdened by the weight of reality. She was a talented singer with a voice that seemed to resonate with the very heartbeat of the streets, but the subway was her stage, and the world beyond it felt like a distant, unreachable place. Every morning, she took the same route to the subway, worn shoes tapping the ground, her guitar case slung across her back as she passed through the bustling streets of the city. The sounds of traffic, the clinking of coins, and the murmurs of strangers filled the air, yet she often felt invisible. The crowd was always moving, lost in their own worlds. She had been singing in the subway for months now, using her music to make ends meet. She was used to the indifferent gazes, the quick flicker of attention before people turned their focus back to their phones or whatever else was on their minds. Yet it didn't stop her. The music was her life, her escape. Each note was a part of her soul that she shared with the few who would listen, even if it was only for a moment. On this particular morning, the city seemed as ordinary as ever, the usual morning rush of commuters hurrying to their destinations. But today would be different. She didn't know it yet, but this day would change everything. Amara set up her little corner on the platform, a space she had claimed as her own, a patch of urban concrete where she could perform. She arranged her guitar, adjusted the mic stand, and took a deep breath. The usual crowd began to shuffle by. She strummed a few chords, feeling the music as it flowed from her fingers and into the cool morning air. Her voice rose, soft at first, but growing stronger, more confident. She was lost in the rhythm, her soul pouring out through the melodies as she sang of dreams, struggles, and the city's heartbeat. But even though her voice carried, few stopped. People glanced her way but quickly went on with their busy lives, unaware of the talent they were passing by. Just as Amara reached the chorus, something changed. There was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. She noticed a man in a dark jacket, sunglasses perched on his nose, standing off to the side. He wasn't part of the crowd. He was alone, still, looking directly at her. His face was familiar, but she couldn't place him at first. She had grown used to the occasional passerby who would stop and listen for a few minutes, but this man was different. There was an intensity in his gaze. He didn't look like just another commuter. He was someone who seemed out of place, like a figure from another world entirely. The crowd around her buzzed with the usual energy, but her focus was drawn entirely to this man. Her fingers faltered for a split second, and that was when she saw him nod slowly, acknowledging her voice with a small, appreciative smile. It was then that it clicked. He was Julian Knight, the famous pop singer who had been a household name for years. Amara's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't just any person off the street. This was someone who had made it, someone who had touched millions with his music. For a moment, she doubted herself. Was she really singing in front of him? The same Julian Knight whose songs had played on the radio, whose face had graced billboards. She quickly composed herself, but the realization left her feeling both nervous and strangely empowered. She didn't stop singing, though. She couldn't afford to. The moment was too surreal, too significant to let it slip away. Her voice grew stronger as she poured everything she had into the next verse, almost as if her soul was singing directly to him and to the world he represented. As the final note of her song hung in the air, the crowd around her moved on, unaware of the monumental thing that had just happened. But Julian Knight didn't leave. He stayed rooted in place, his eyes fixed on her. For a moment, Amara thought he might just be another celebrity passing through, someone who appreciated the art for a moment before moving on. But instead, Julian took a step forward and dropped a thick wad of cash into her guitar case. He didn't say anything, but his gesture spoke volumes. He smiled, nodded once more, and turned to leave, walking toward the stairs that led to the exit. Amara stood frozen, staring at the money that now lay in her case, unsure if it was real or if she had imagined the entire thing. It wasn't just the money. It was the acknowledgement, the recognition. Her music had made an impression on someone who was part of the very industry she dreamed of breaking into. She was shaken, that there was also a new fire within her. Her dream, one that had always felt like a distant possibility, suddenly felt within reach. As she packed up her things and prepared to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her best friend, Raquel. "Girl, you won't believe this. Julian Knight just commented on your video from the subway. It's blowing up." Her heart raced as she opened the message and saw the notification. Sure enough, Julian had posted about her performance, tagging her in a story with a simple message. "Keep your eyes on this one. She's going places." The floodgates had opened. Within minutes, her phone was buzzing with new followers, messages, and offers. It was surreal, overwhelming, and yet exhilarating all at once. She stood there, on the subway platform, still trying to process what had just happened. A simple subway performance had turned into something much bigger, something beyond her wildest dreams. But in that moment, Amara knew one thing for sure: her life was about to change. The next morning, Amara could hardly believe what was happening. Her phone, once just a tool to keep in touch with family and friends, had transformed into a non-stop stream of notifications. Social media was ablaze with her name. Videos of her subway performance from the day before had gone viral, and Julian Knight's endorsement was everywhere. Thousands of strangers had watched her sing, shared her story, and expressed their admiration for her raw talent. It was overwhelming. She had always dreamed of recognition, of being seen, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Every time she checked her phone, the numbers kept climbing. Followers, likes, messages from strangers, and the occasional industry professional. Amara was still sitting on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her messages, trying to process the whirlwind that was unfolding before her. Some messages were filled with praise, others with questions. A few were from people offering advice, some kind, others skeptical, as if they wanted to remind her of how quickly fame could fade. Yet the overwhelming sentiment was one of support, a belief in her talent and potential. And then there were the offers: invitations to perform at local venues, requests for interviews, and even a few from music managers wanting to discuss a future together. She knew this could be her shot, her moment. But something inside her hesitated. Raquel, her best friend, had sent her a message an hour ago, urging her to meet up. "Come on, Amara, let's talk about what happens next. This is big. We need to figure out what you're going to do." Raquel had always been Amara's rock, the one who would ground her when things got too wild. It was what she needed now, someone to help her make sense of it all. So Amara grabbed her jacket and headed out, still reeling from the explosion of attention, but knowing that a conversation with Raquel might help her put things into perspective. When she met Raquel at their usual cafe, the place was quieter than usual. Raquel had her phone out, showing Amara the latest social media posts about her. "Look at this," Raquel said, her eyes wide. "It's not just your music. They're talking about your story. They love the underdog coming up. People are saying you're the next big thing in music, and they're all sharing that video Julian posted. People want to hear more from you." Amara felt a flutter in her chest. But what does it all mean? "I mean, I've always dreamed of this, but now it feels overwhelming. People are excited, sure, but is it just a phase? What if I can't live up to their expectations?" Raquel gave her a sympathetic smile. "You're not alone in this, Amara. And look, you've got something most artists never get: a real shot. You don't just get Julian Knight's attention out of nowhere. He sees something in you. He wouldn't have shared your performance if he didn't think you had it. This is your chance to really go for it. What do you want?" The question hit her like a ton of bricks. What did she want? She had always told herself that fame wasn't important, that making music she loved and staying true to herself was the goal. But now that the chance to make a name for herself in the music industry was in front of her, she felt torn. Her heart said one thing, but her head was filled with doubts. Could she handle the pressure? Could she keep her identity in a world that might want to mold her into something she wasn't? Was this success worth it if it meant sacrificing the authenticity she had always clung to? I don't know, Raquel, she admitted. I've been singing in the subway for so long because it's where I feel free. It's where I don't have to follow anyone's rules. But now, it feels like everything is changing. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. What if I lose myself in it? Raquel leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. Listen, no one can take your voice away from you. The question isn't whether you'll change, it's how you want to change. If you decide to take this chance, you can still be you. But you have to decide what kind of artist you want to be. The subway's not going anywhere. You can still play there. But if you want to take the next step, it's going to be bigger than just you and your guitar. Amara stared into her coffee cup, turning the words over in her mind. Raquel was right. The subway had been her refuge, her safe space. But what if this was the opportunity that could allow her to reach even more people? Could she really let it slip away just because it scared her? Or was it time to take a leap into the unknown, knowing that some of her comfort might be left behind? As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from a producer at a well-known record label. The message was brief but direct. We've been following your progress. Julian Knight says you have serious potential. Let's talk. Amara stared at the screen, the reality of it hitting her all over again. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a turning point, and everything depended on the choice she made next. Raquel placed a hand on her arm. I know it's a lot to take in. But remember, whatever you choose, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and you have people who believe in you. You've already made an impact. You can either keep going down your path or step into a new one. Just know that this is your journey, and you're in control of how it goes. Amara took a deep breath, her heart racing with the weight of the decision ahead of her. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about her music. It was about everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. She had been singing for years in the subway, with no guarantee that anyone would listen, that anything would ever come of it. But now, the world was listening. Now, the world was watching. She was at a crossroads, and there was no turning back. The choices she made in the next few days would define not just her career, but who she was as an artist. But for now, she wasn't ready to make that decision. She needed time. She needed to think. But one thing was certain. Whatever path she chose, Amara was no longer just a subway singer. She was something more. She was a story in the making. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and excitement for Amara. She had always imagined what it would be like to have her big break, but now that it was happening, everything seemed so much more complicated. The messages kept pouring in, and with each new notification, the pressure mounted. Everyone had an opinion on what she should do next. Some of her friends, like Raquel, were encouraging her to take the plunge into the music industry. This is your moment, Amara, she'd say over the phone. You can't let this pass you by. You're talented, and you have the chance to work with real professionals now. Don't hold back. But other messages from strangers, people who claimed to understand the pressures of the industry, warned her not to change who she was. Don't let them mold you into something you're not. One message said, stay true to the subway. That's where you're authentic. The conflicting advice was dizzying. The only thing Amara knew for sure was that this wasn't just about music anymore. This was about her future, her identity, and the fear that she might lose herself in the very dream she had chased for so long. Julian's team continued to reach out, urging her to meet with them to discuss the opportunities they could offer. They spoke of records, collaborations, and a spotlight she had only dreamed of. The attention she was getting from the music industry felt like a dream, but it also felt like a trap. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much was at stake. Would she be able to keep the freedom she had always felt performing in the subway? Or would she be forced into a version of herself that didn't feel right? Was it worth risking her identity, her voice, her passion just for a chance to be famous? Raquel had told her that the decision was hers, but it didn't make it easier. Her mind kept going back to the moment when Julian had stood there, watching her in the subway. The way he had thrown the money into her guitar case. It wasn't just about the money. It was the recognition, the acknowledgement that what she was doing mattered. That felt like a validation of everything she had been working toward, yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough just to be noticed. She wanted to know if her talent could stand on its own. Could she maintain her artistic integrity in the spotlight, or would she be swallowed by the machine of the industry? Amara spent more time alone in her small apartment, wrestling with these thoughts. She would wake up each morning to an inbox filled with emails from labels, messages from fans, and offers for performances. Yet she couldn't bring herself to open them all. It was like there was a weight on her chest, pressing down on her every time she tried to imagine herself standing on a stage, with the bright lights blinding her, the expectations of the crowd surrounding her. Was this the life she wanted, or was it just a life she had always thought she wanted? The turning point came one evening when Amara received an unexpected call. It was from her mother, who hadn't been involved much in the decision-making up until this point. "Amara, I've been hearing about all the offers coming your way," her mother said, her voice full of warmth and worry. "I just want you to know I'm proud of you, no matter what you decide. But I want you to really think about what kind of life you want. Do you want to be a star, or do you want to be an artist? Because they're not always the same thing." Her mother's words hit her like a ton of bricks. Amara had always admired her mother's ability to find joy in the small things, the simple pleasures of life. Her mother had never cared about fame, never cared about whether the world saw her as successful. She cared about honesty, kindness, and love. "Just make sure you're doing this for you, not for anyone else," her mother added. "You've got the talent, sweetie. Don't let the world tell you who you are. You get to decide that." Those words resonated deeply with Amara. She realized that, for the first time, the decision was in her hands. Julian had given her the opportunity, but it was her choice whether or not she would take it. If she wanted the fame and fortune that came with being in the spotlight, she could have it. But if she wanted to stay true to herself, if she wanted to keep the authenticity that had made her love music in the first place, she had to be willing to sacrifice some of that dream. The dream of being recognized by the masses, the dream of being on stage in front of thousands. Those were tempting, yes, but they came with costs she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Amara decided to take a break from everything. She needed space to think, time to clear her mind and focus on what really mattered. She packed a small bag and decided to return to the one place where she had always found peace, the subway. It wasn't glamorous. There was no stage, no cameras, no flashing lights, just the cold concrete, the rumbling trains, and the occasional passerby. But there was something pure about it, something raw. As she stood there on the familiar platform, guitar in hand, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was where it all started, where the love for music began. Here, she was free. She began to play. Her fingers moved over the strings with ease, the familiar melody filling the air. The crowd around her barely acknowledged her, as usual. But it didn't matter. She wasn't performing for them. She was performing for herself, reconnecting with the music that had first captured her heart. The songs she played were hers and hers alone. The words, the notes, a reflection of her soul. And in that moment, Amara realized that she didn't need to change who she was to be loved or heard. She didn't need fame or fortune to prove her worth. What mattered was the music and the joy it brought her. Yet, as she played, something unexpected happened. A small group of people stopped, drawn to the sound of her voice, to the passion that rang through every note. They listened, they clapped, and as Amara finished her song, one of them approached her. "That was amazing," the stranger said. "You're really something special. Don't let the world take that away from you." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. This was why she sang. Not for fame, not for money, but for the moments like this, when the music reached someone and made them feel something. Maybe it was time for her to stop chasing the spotlight and start creating her own path. The decision wasn't easy, but in that moment, It felt right. The days after her visit to the subway were both clearer and more confusing for Amara. She had made peace with the idea of sticking to her roots, focusing on the music she loved, and letting go of the pressure to conform to the industry's demands. But just as she was beginning to find a sense of calm, the phone calls and emails started up again. The offers kept coming, more urgent and tempting than before. She couldn't escape it. Her decision wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone else who had placed their hopes on her. Her followers, the strangers who had cheered for her, Julian Knight, and even the people she had known her whole life, all seemed to be waiting for her to make her move. And then came the call that would change everything. It was Julian himself, calling from a private number, his voice smooth but firm on the other end of the line. "Amara," he said, "I've been following you closely. I know you've been hesitant, but I believe in you. I'm putting together a project. An album, something real. You've got the voice, the style. All we need is for you to take that leap. You can still keep your authenticity. Trust me on this." Her heart raced. There was no denying that Julian's words held weight. He had worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry, his influence far-reaching. He wasn't just offering her a deal. He was offering her a chance to redefine her career. But there was something in his tone, a subtle pressure, that made her uneasy. It wasn't just the music he wanted from her. It felt like he wanted her to become something more, something he could mold. "I don't know, Julian," Amara said, feeling her doubts creep back in. "I'm not sure I'm ready to give up the music I've been making. I don't want to lose myself in this." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Amara thought he might hang up. But Julian's voice softened, his tone more persuasive now. "I'm not asking you to lose yourself. I'm asking you to take this opportunity. Think of where you could be in just a few months. This isn't just about me or about the label. This is about you and your future." She could hear the sincerity in his voice, and yet something about it didn't sit right with her. She had always believed that her voice, her true self, was enough. But now, faced with the reality of a major contract and the possibility of mainstream success, she realized that nothing would be the same. Julian's offer wasn't just an opportunity, it was a turning point. She was being asked to choose between the path she had always dreamed of and the one she had built for herself through grit and hard work. She needed time. That evening, after hanging up with Julian, Amara sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. She walked over to her guitar, its strings almost like an old friend. She strummed a few notes absently, letting the sound fill the room. Her mind kept replaying Julian's words, his offer, the life she could have if she took that leap. But every time she thought about it, she saw the subway platform, the way it had felt to perform there, unfiltered, honest, and raw. She saw the faces of the people who had stopped to listen, not because they were following a trend or a famous name, but because they heard something real in her voice. Her thoughts drifted to the community she had built around her music. The subway wasn't just a place where she played. It was a home for all the people who, like her, had felt ignored by the world. The tired commuters, the lost tourists, the ones who had no other place to turn. Her voice gave them something they could hold on to. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It was something deeper, something that transcended the superficial. She couldn't ignore that. She couldn't forget the feeling of connecting with someone through music, of touching lives in a way that fame never could. The next day, Amara decided to take a walk around the city to clear her head. She found herself back at the subway station, her familiar spot. The noise of the trains, the hustle of the crowd, the occasional voice calling out from the platform. Everything felt familiar. But as she stood there, guitar in hand, she realized that this place had changed for her. It wasn't just a place to perform anymore. It had become a symbol of her struggle, her journey, and now her crossroads. She began to play, the chords flowing from her fingers without hesitation. There was something magical about the moment, the way the music seemed to lift her, to remind her of everything she had already built. The familiar faces in the crowd, the small nods of recognition from those who had heard her before, the way the sound of the guitar echoed off the walls. It was everything she had fought for. She was here, on her own terms, creating something real. No cameras, no agents, no record labels, just her and the music. As she finished the song, a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. It was Raquel, standing at the edge of the platform, her arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. "I had a feeling you'd come back here," Raquel said, walking up to her. "You know, the world might be waiting for you to make your move, but you're the only one who really gets to decide where you go from here." Amara looked at her friend, realizing just how much she had come to rely on her advice, her steady perspective. "I don't know what to do, Raquel. I want it all. But I don't want to lose who I am in the process." Raquel shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "You don't have to choose between the two. You can have both, Amara. You just have to figure out what having it all means for you." And that was when Amara realized that the decision wasn't as black and white as she had thought. She didn't have to follow the traditional path to success. She could carve out her own journey, creating a space where authenticity and ambition could coexist. The world was offering her opportunities, yes, but it was up to her how she used them. In the days that followed, Amara spoke with Julian again. She thanked him for the opportunity, but told him she needed to find a way to make her own path without compromising who she was. The music industry was still a world that intrigued her, but it was her decision whether or not to enter it on its terms. Julian didn't understand at first, but he respected her decision. As Amara walked through the city, her mind clearer than it had been in days, she felt a quiet sense of confidence settling in. There was a balance to be found between staying true to her roots and reaching for the stars. But for now, she was content with the music, the message, and the life she was creating. She had taken her first real step towards defining what success meant for her. The rest would come in time. The days that followed Amara's decision to stay true to herself were filled with a strange combination of relief and uncertainty. She had made her choice, but the world around her didn't stop turning. The offers still came, but now they felt more like noise than opportunities. She had turned down the record deals, the flashy promises of fame, and the structured paths others wanted to lay out for her. But what she hadn't expected was how difficult it would be to stay grounded in her decision. The world of fame and fortune, even from a distance, had a way of tugging at you, tempting you with everything you could have. And yet, Amara clung to her belief that her music had to remain hers, authentic, raw, and free from the molds others wanted her to fit into. The subway remained her stage, but it wasn't the same anymore. She couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within her. As she played her usual sets on the platform, she noticed fewer people stopping to listen. The crowds were still there, rushing to and from their destinations, but it felt like the magic had faded. Maybe it was because they knew her face now, or maybe because she had become a fleeting viral moment, a novelty that people grew tired of. For a while, the attention she had once craved felt like a burden. She wasn't just Amara, the subway singer anymore. She was Amara, the girl who could have been famous and turned it down. That title carried its own weight, its own set of expectations. The calls from Julian's team didn't stop either, each one more persistent than the last. He respected her decision, but it was clear that he didn't understand it. One night, after a particularly long and exhausting set in the subway, Amara checked her phone to find another voicemail from Julian's manager. "We're ready when you are, Amara," the message said. "You don't have to turn your back on this. We're not asking you to change who you are. We're asking you to take what's yours." For the first time, Amara considered the possibility that she had made a mistake. Was she really being true to herself by rejecting everything she had worked for? Was she really being true to her art if she wasn't giving it the chance to reach a wider audience? She spent the next few days in a haze of indecision, thinking about the things she had sacrificed and the things she had gained. There was a part of her that wondered if she was simply too scared to make the jump, too afraid to lose herself in a world that demanded more than she was willing to give. But there was another part, a smaller part, that still believed in the authenticity of her music, in the pure connection that could happen between her and her listeners, regardless of how many there were or how famous she became. It was during this time of reflection that something unexpected happened. While performing in the subway, a woman approached her after the set, her eyes wide with recognition. She didn't look like a music executive or someone from the media. She looked like just another commuter. But there was something about her presence, the way she stood with a quiet intensity, that caught Amara's attention. "I heard you sing," the woman said, her voice steady but kind. "I just wanted to say that you have something truly special. Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough." The woman smiled and left a folded piece of paper in Amara's guitar case before walking away. Amara opened it slowly, her heart beating faster as she read the words. "I'm an independent producer, and I believe in your music. If you're ever interested in recording and keeping control of your art, please reach out." No label, no flashy promises of fame, just a genuine interest in her music. This was exactly what she had been looking for, an opportunity to share her music without sacrificing her soul to the industry. The next few days were a whirlwind. Amara reached out to the woman, whose name turned out to be Claire, and they met for coffee to discuss the possibility of working together. Claire was nothing like the high-powered executives who had contacted her before. She was calm, understanding, and most importantly, she didn't try to change Amara's vision. She offered a partnership that would allow Amara to remain in control of her music, her image, and her career. Claire understood the delicate balance between artistic integrity and commercial success, and she was willing to work with Amara to build something that honored both. The project was small at first, a few local performances, a demo recording, and a handful of online songs. But what made this different was that it didn't feel like a sellout. It wasn't about trying to cater to the masses or changing her sound to fit into a particular mold. It was about creating music that connected with people on a deeper level, music that told stories, that spoke to emotions. And when Amara shared her new work with the small but growing group of fans she had accumulated over the months, something incredible happened. They loved it. They were drawn to her authenticity, her sincerity, and her willingness to be herself. As the project grew, so did Amara's confidence. She started performing at smaller venues, places where she could connect with the audience on a more personal level. There was a balance now. She was still singing in the subway when she wanted to, still playing for the people who had supported her from the beginning. But she was also gaining exposure in a way that felt right, a way that kept her connected to her roots. She didn't need the glitz and glamour of the industry to prove she was successful. Success, she realized, was about making music that mattered, music that resonated with her listeners, whether there were 5 people in the crowd or 5,000. But the road wasn't easy. The criticism still came, as it always did when someone chose to take a different path. Some people still didn't understand why she didn't take the big offer, why she didn't want to become a commercial success. And Amara knew that there would always be doubts, both from the outside world and from within herself. But she also knew that no matter what happened, she had made the right choice for her. She wasn't living for the applause. She was living for the music. It was in the quiet moments, when she sat on the subway platform alone, playing her guitar, that Amara realized what she had built was more than just a career. It was a community. She had carved out a space where people didn't just listen to her music. They felt it. They experienced it with her. She wasn't just Amara, the girl who almost made it big. She was Amara, the artist who stayed true to her sound. And that was enough. And just when she thought it couldn't get any better, she received an unexpected message from Julian Knight. "You've done it, Amara. You found your way," he wrote. "I can respect that." In that moment, Amara knew that the journey she had chosen was the right one for her. It wasn't always easy, but it was hers. And that, she realized, was the greatest success she could ever achieve. As the months passed, Amara found herself in a place she hadn't imagined, not because it was a dream she had chased, but because it was a space she had carved out for herself. A space that was hers, completely and undeniably. She had taken the path less traveled, a road full of bumps and obstacles, but also one filled with unexpected rewards and quiet victories. She had stayed true to her voice, her art, and the reason she had started singing in the first place. The subway platform, once a place of anonymity and struggle, had now become a symbol of her strength and authenticity. It was where it all began, and she had returned to it again and again, a reminder of the roots she never let go of. Her partnership with Claire had blossomed into something real and meaningful. Amara's songs, recorded and produced with care, were now being shared with a wider audience, on streaming platforms, in small venues, and in the homes of listeners who appreciated music for its soul and not its commercial appeal. The response was overwhelming, but it didn't feel like a flood of strangers. It felt like an extension of the community she had been building all along. People who had followed her journey from the subway to the small, intimate shows began to reach out, telling her how her music had touched their lives, how it had made them feel seen. And in return, Amara felt seen, too, not by the industry or by the endless clamor of fame, but by the people who mattered most, the ones who understood her, who felt her. She still performed in the subway, still sang for the commuters who might pass by without a second glance, but now when she played, there was a deeper resonance in her voice, a confidence that came from knowing her place in the world. The songs she played were no longer just for the money or the chance of discovery. They were for herself and for the people who stopped to listen, whether out of curiosity or because something in her music spoke to them. Amara had always believed that music had the power to heal, to bring people together in ways nothing else could. And now, more than ever, she felt that power radiating through her, but not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. The balance between her private life and her growing visibility in the music scene became harder to maintain. Her success was undeniable, but with it came more attention, more expectations, and more scrutiny. Social media was both a gift and a curse. While it connected her with fans from all over the world, it also opened the door to criticism and judgment. The music industry, despite its promises of creative freedom, still had its own rules and standards. Amara was often asked to adjust her image, tweak her sound, or sell a part of herself in exchange for more visibility, more sales. At first, these requests were small, just a few promotional photos, they said. Just a little more polish on your music, they suggested. But Amara had learned the hard way that once you begin to compromise, it's difficult to know where the line is. The questions began to surface in her mind. Would I lose myself again if I give in to these demands? Would I still be the same artist if I let others dictate my sound? There were days when she felt frustrated, days when she doubted her decision to turn down the record deals, to turn down the promises of instant fame. It wasn't always easy to resist the temptation of bigger stages, more money, or the validation that came with massive exposure. But every time the doubt crept in, Amara returned to the subway, to the quiet, familiar space where her heart had first found its rhythm. She returned to the people who didn't expect anything from her except for the truth in her music. And that's when she remembered why she had started this journey, to make music that mattered, to stay true to herself, and to find a way to succeed on her own terms. One evening, after a particularly packed performance at a local venue, Amara received a call from an unexpected source, Julian Knight. They hadn't spoken in months, not since her decision to go her own way. His voice on the other end was warm, but tinged with curiosity.